Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Have a group of distinguished scientists taken paranormal research to a new level? What breakthroughs have they made by acknowledging our multidimensional reality? What are the contact modalities?
The 951st edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I'm Rick Eno, sitting in for my cousin Ben today, and those brainy questions came from my co-host and cousin Paul. Today we welcome back a distinguished friend and one of our regular guest co-hosts.
Now, I want to mention that today is, of course, Father's Day, so happy Father's Day all around. Any fool can become a father. It takes love, honor, and commitment to duty to actually be one. In these times of militant narcissism, as I call it, those qualities are hard to come by, and society kind of looks it. And what's the greatest thing a father can do for his children? Love their mother. Anyway, let's welcome our guest. Rey Hernandez is director of the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, or CCRI, and we refer to that because around here that means Community College of Rhode Island, but that's not what we're talking about today. A not-for-profit academic research organization composed of, and Rey can correct me on this because the numbers keep growing, 20 Ph.D. academics and 4 medical doctors whose mission is to explore the relationship between consciousness, cosmology, and contact with non-human intelligence via the contact modalities. CCRI has been engaged in a 5-year academic research study on this topic. Sounds like Star Trek. A 2,000-page book entitled A Greater Reality, The New Paradigm of Local Consciousness, the Paranormal, and the Contact Modalities, is to be released in August. Rey was the founder of the Dr. Edgar E. Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounters, or FREE, which also produced a huge book, Beyond UFOs, The Science of Contact with Non-Human Intelligence. A practicing tax attorney, Rey graduated with honors from Rutgers College, was master's candidate at Cornell University and doctoral candidate at the University of California at Berkeley, where he received the National Science Foundation Fellowship.
Rey Hernandez, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Thank you very much for inviting me again, and happy Father's Day to both of you and to all the audience members.
Yes. This is the one day of the year I supposedly get to do nothing. However, I have a feeling I'd rather spend it doing something with my family. So, thank you. Rey, what are the origins of CCRI, and who are some of the researchers who are reading?
Well, CCRI began after the mission was accomplished with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. The objective of that organization was to undertake the world's first comprehensive academic, statistical, worldwide research study of individuals that had seen UFOs and have had some type of contact experience with a non-human intelligence. And we spent 5 years doing that research. And at the end of it all, we published an 820-page book titled Beyond UFOs, The Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence. And that book is available on Amazon. And but the reason why we did that study in the first place was not that our organization was interested in only UFOs. We knew that the UFO phenomenon was part of an integrated phenomenon with the other contact modalities, and I'll define that in a couple of minutes. But there was lots of data on near-death experiencers. There were many books that were written on that topic, lots of statistical research. There was also many books that have been written about out-of-body experiences. Not as many as the NDEs, but certainly a lot. And then the people that had communicated with the deceased via either mediumship, channeling, or other forms of contact with the deceased. There are literally hundreds of those types of books. But when it came to actual statistical data on the UFO contact phenomenon, there was little to none. The little was Dr. Kenneth Ring published a statistical study that he did in 1996. And that book was titled The Omega Project, where he compared 85 individuals that had UFO contact experiences with 85 people that had NDEs. And that was pretty much it. Kathleen Martin had done a study of only 50 people. She only asked 50 questions, and she only utilized individuals that had an abduction experience. And what we subsequently learned in our research study was the abduction phenomenon was a very small percentage of the people that actually had UFO contact experiences. So, in other words, there was little to no data on the phenomenon. And so what we found out by our research study pretty much contradicts what is circulating in the field of ufology. And I can go into those details later on. And one of the main findings was that this phenomenon was pretty much a paranormal phenomenon instead of a physicalist phenomenon. While individuals have seen UFOs, while they've seen perceived physical beings, the overwhelming majority of their experiencers were basically paranormal in nature. So that's why we had to expand the study further to be able to study what I call the contact modalities and its relationship with consciousness. What is the nature of our reality? And I know Paul has been studying this link for 50 years.
Ray, you coined the term contact modalities, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Could you just give a few examples for our audience of what they may be?
Well, the very simple definition of the contact modalities are all the different ways that humans are piercing the veil of our reality and having contact with higher forms of intelligence, i.e. non-human intelligence. And examples are near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, astral traveling, people who see UFOs, people that have seen deceased people, people that communicate with the deceased, either mediumship, channeling, etc., remote viewing, and various forms of the ESP, hallucinogenic journeys. I prefer the term entheogenic journeys because these are not hallucinations, etc., etc. And we at the CCRI, the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, believe in two hypotheses. One, first of all, is that all of us perceive that consciousness is fundamental. What that means, basically in a nutshell, is that what we perceive as our physical reality is not our true reality. There's something underneath, something a little bit more complicated behind it. And then secondly, that all of the contact modalities, those phenomena that I described earlier, that they are all somehow interrelated, and they need to be studied not as separate and distinct phenomenon, but as one integrated phenomenon, again, under the rubric of consciousness.
Okay, we've set the stage now for the talking about that rather amazing project that I'm very proud to be involved with. But let's go back, Ray, to what got you interested in the subject in the first place, because you, as I understand it, were an unreconstructed atheist. Okay? And we have a question here from, of course, Bogota, Colombia, and our good friend Peter Shelley, who was an occasional co-host here. Rick, do you have those questions?
Not at hand.
Okay, because, well, I'll ask them. It's traditional for Ben, too, but we'll break with tradition here. So this is for Ray. Regarding the event where you were in your car taken to another reality, can you describe the visual environment you found yourself in? Were you in a building? Were you in outer space? Please paint us a picture. Were there any objects?
Okay. First of all, that occurred in May of 2013. By that date, I had approximately a year and a half of paranormal experiences. I had been calling down various UAPs. I had been seeing shadow beings in my house. I've been having out-of-body experiences. And all of this started by seeing an energy being in my living room with my wife on March the 4th of 2012, where this energy being made my wife disappear, the dog disappear, and we were going to be euthanizing our dog later that afternoon. And this energy being put me to sleep for about an hour, and then when I woke up, my wife was dancing around the living room saying that the angels cured her, the angels cured her, hallelujah, hallelujah. And the dog was running around the entire living room. This is a dog that we were going to be putting to sleep later that afternoon. So that's how my experiences began. Now, to answer that question, after a year and a half of having these paranormal experiences, that day I was going to work in Miami at 8:30 in the morning. I was listening to a radio interview, and all of a sudden I was not in the car. Initially, I was pure mind. There were no physical surroundings. And then little by little, I appeared to be inside a cartwheel. And I was in the center of the cartwheel, and I saw these various different spokes. And then slowly inside each of these spokes, videos appeared. They were all different. And then when I looked at each one, I got a download of information about what that was about. And those were the contact modalities. I would look at a video, and all of a sudden I knew that was about near-death experiences. The next spoke, there was a video, and then with all the information download, and I knew that was about out-of-body experiences and astral travel. I would look at the next one, that was about UFOs and the UFO contact phenomenon, et cetera, et cetera. And it took me through maybe 8 different phenomena. And at the end of it all, it told me, it wasn't a voice, it was just straight information, that these are all of the different ways that humans are communicating with us. Humans believe that they're all separate and distinct, but they're not. It's all one phenomenon. And the glue, that's the term that came into my mind. And the glue that's holding it all together, humans are calling it consciousness. But in fact, what it is the fabric of our reality. And then it told me that I needed to do something. It said, you need to inform humanity of the relationship between us, the spirit world, and consciousness. And then it told me I'm going to need some help. The help, I have to be individuals with minimal ego. And boom, I was back in my car. With no time had elapsed. The interview was still going, didn't even skip a second. And then I was like freaking out, trying to determine what happened to me. So the seeds of what I needed to do were planted during that experience. And it was within 50 hours from that experience, I was at the home of Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And that's where the Free Foundation was formed.
Yeah, Apollo 16 astronaut.
Yeah, 14, Apollo 14 astronaut.
14, yeah. Well, he's been on the show. The late Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to say.
Yes.
It's just a practical question there, Ray, because I think of these things. Were you driving while that occurred?
Oh, yes, of course.
And you didn't pancake any manatees or anything?
No, because I was literally taken outside of space-time. And you probably have spoken with many individuals that have had missing time. People were driving their cars, and all of a sudden they would appear, 3 or 4 hours later, all the way on the other side of the city. And they said to themselves, how in the hell did I get here? And look, it's nighttime. When I was driving, it was daytime. So there are literally hundreds of these types of experiences. And they've already been flushed out in many radio shows, many interviews, and even in our surveys. We adequately describe that phenomenon. So it's not like my experience was unusual. What was unusual was the particulars of that experience. It really was like an astral travel experience. Well, I was literally brought to another multidimensional reality and given this information. But that whatever this intelligence is, I call it the mind of God, it also put in front of me within those 50 hours, Mary Rodwell, Dr. Rudy Shields, and Edgar Mitchell, three individuals who I'd never spoken to before. It put me in communication with them within 50 hours. And so the four of us became the co-founders of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. And again, you could talk to Rudy, interview Rudy. You could interview Mary Rodwell, ask her that question, and they'll substantiate it. It's hard to believe, but it's the nature of many of these paranormal experiences. There really is no scientific explanation for any of this.
Well, we often say some of these things are outside of science.
Yes, that's correct.
It's practiced. Anyway. And we also, another one of our nifty slogans, today's paranormal is tomorrow's science. So.
That's definitely 100% correct.
So you see, here's a second question from Peter, and you already began, I think, to answer this, Ray, but maybe you'd like to extrapolate. You say you were shown things. Does that mean there was a figure talking to you? If there was a figure, what did it look and sound like? Were you told where you were?
No, as I said before, it wasn't a being, a physical being. It was straight information. It wasn't even a voice. It was like a lot of people describe a near-death experience, where they're getting straight information. And also in our research study, the UFO contact phenomenon, we documented hundreds of these cases where people were getting downloads. And these downloads were not a voice. It was just straight information. So I didn't know it at that time, but later on after we did our research study and also you talked to many experiencers, you realize that this phenomenon is quite common with experiencers. And in terms of location, to me, I was in a multidimensional reality because there was no physicality to it except you're just focusing on seeing this wheel and what's inside the wheel.
Okay, I have one more question, then we're going to let Rick jump in here.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by the fact that medical doctors over the years, sometimes psychologists, have called me more skeptical than they are. All right, but there are a number of medical doctors and psychologists and physicists and a number of other Ph.D.s involved in the research committee of CCRI. Can you tell me why medical doctors are so interested in this subject?
Well, most of the medical doctors that are interested in what we're doing, they fall into two categories. These are medical doctors that have researched the near-death experience phenomenon, or medical doctors that have actually researched entheogenic contact experiences. For example, DMT, psilocybin, peyote, LSD, etc. We have two articles by two of these individuals that research entheogens, and both of those articles compare the DMT and the psilocybin experience as an NDE experience. Very, very similar. Half of the people are communicating with a being that they identify as God. And so these are, hundreds of individuals that have taken these things, and they've documented them over many, many, many years. And so, but most of the medical doctors that are going to be in our book, many of them thought that ufology was a whole bunch of crackpots, and I certainly understand them because. Part of me still believes that. They're still looking at the nuts and bolts approach, and they're totally clueless as to the bigger picture. And that materialist approach, my perspective is that has given us very little to be able to understand the phenomenon. So let me just give you a little side story. You might not know this. I was told by Kenneth Ring, who was he's now in his mid-80s. He's about 85 years old. He is one of the pioneers of near-death experiences. He's a Ph.D. Psychologist, professor at the University of Connecticut for 30 more than 30 years, 35 years. And he told me, Ray, because I told him I'm going to be interviewing Raymond Moody and Dr. Jeffrey Long. And these are two of the bigwigs in near-death experiences. And Raymond Moody actually coined the term NDE. And so he said, look, Ray, those guys don't believe in UFOs at all. They think all the people that study UFOs are all a bunch of crackpots. And he says, don't even mention that, you know. So what I did is when I was interviewing both of them in the very beginning, I was reading questions from our survey that's in our book, Beyond UFOs, and they didn't see the cover. They were just answering questions for like a half an hour. Then after a half hour, I turned the book around and they got to see the cover, Beyond UFOs, and both of their jaws dropped because they said, oh, my God, I thought you were asking NDE-related questions. And I said, no, these are questions that we asked in our survey, and that, in fact, the NDE matches up so much with the UFO contact phenomenon. And they were clueless. They had no idea. And so that's how they then began to assimilate and associate the consciousness aspect of ufology. They just didn't know about it. So, but many of the doctors in there, also Eben Alexander, who started off as a professor of brain surgery. He was at Harvard for 15 years, and he had a major NDE. Now this man certainly understands that consciousness is fundamental, and that all of the contact modalities need to be studied as one phenomenon. He knows that because of his NDE. But we still have a long way to go with many of the medical doctors, but certainly the medical doctors that have written chapters for our book, they understand these concepts. But that's because they've either researched the entheogenic phenomenon or the NDE phenomenon. Okay. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and just to point out to the listeners, we had a great show with Dr. Jeffrey Long, and that was on January 30th. It was a show number 931 in our archives at behindtheparanormal.com, and it's on a lot of the podcast apps too. So, Rick, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions because this is fascinating. When you're speaking of your experience in the car, and I'm interested in this from the perspective of your experience and what you've seen out there with other cases. You mentioned that this download sort of happened. There was an astral projection somewhere, and then, if I'm correct, there was no time loss. Is that when you go back in the car? Is that correct?
That's correct. No time lost. I was literally taken outside of time and space.
Okay.
And that usually happens with NDE experiences and astral traveling experiences. Many people that have had NDEs, like, for example, my father had an NDE, and he told me he was gone for 20 or 30 years because he said that's how long it took his life review to last, because the being that he associated as God showed him all his life, and he was able to relive the major highlights of his life. And he said it lasted 20 to 30 years. You talk to other NDE experiencers, they said they were up there in this other realm for months, even years at a time. But yet they might have been dead for 5 minutes. So, and also in our surveys, in the UFO contact survey, many people had the same or similar experience. 50%, 1 out of every 2 people, were brought to a matrix reality. Okay? And in that matrix reality, we asked like maybe 15 questions about your experience then. And I would say the vast majority said that time seemed to stop. And so I guess a common way of looking at this is, Paul knows this very well. Many people have had missing time. Like, for example, my wife had missing time in the living room. When I saw that energy being, she and the dog disappeared. I have no idea where she went. And then when I woke up and the dog was totally running around the living room healthy, I asked her, where were you? I said, look at the time. It's 7 a.m. We woke up at 6. Where were you this last hour? She goes, I didn't go anywhere. You know, to her, it was like she had gone down the stairs. She looked down. The dog was running around the living room. That 1 hour that she was gone, she had no idea. So she had 1 hour of missing time. So these concepts are very apparent in these paranormal types of experiences. The missing time aspect, also with astral travelers. People, they go out of their body and then they go into higher realms. They don't stay in the 4D realm where they're seeing their body underneath them and or like remote viewing where you're dealing with your physical environment. They go into other multi-dimensional dimensions. And again, these people also detail the aspect of time, that in that realm, time doesn't exist. And I could discuss that a little bit further, but yet this concept of manipulation of space-time is one of the commonalities of all the contact modalities. All of the contact modalities involves a manipulation of space-time. And I can go into that as well as numerous other commonalities, like telepathic communication, for example. Those are just two of them, but yes.
Okay, well, why don't we take our mid-show break right now? You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, with Rick Eno sitting in for Ben today on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to the Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal on WOON Radio, AM and FM. And we're speaking today with Rey Hernandez of the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, a dear friend of ours who has led the quest to produce another tremendous book, 2,000-page, 4-volume book on a greater reality. And also sitting in for Ben today is Rick Eno, known to our open line audiences as a major theological figure in MUFON and the radio industry. And so I just wanted to point out before I turn it back to Rick that what Ray was talking about is the missing time phenomenon and compressed time, things of this kind, is well known to researchers of consciousness, who often refer to it as perpendicular time or perpendicular consciousness streams. And the whole thing of the life review going through literally every moment of your life in what to you is 30 or 40 years and to everybody else is like a second or two, is known to these people, and, you know, they interpret it in one way or another. So, Rick, carry on.
Okay, thanks. Well, you know, as a researcher, mostly with encountering witnesses that have been abducted from UFOs, physical objects, what's interesting about this, Ray, is that they usually, in a UFO investigation, you can account every time for a specific period of time that they've lost. It's gone. And what you're experiencing and others have experienced is no, that time hasn't changed here in the physical universe. No matter how long you reviewed it and feeling it in the astral plane, here it wasn't a change. And I wonder, when I think about the two sort of modalities, for what happened to you isn't really abduction. It's like a download, is what you said. So is there a commonality between these visitors that we call aliens and UFOs, and is there a common link in some of the cases with these sort of downloads and non-missing time?
Well, first of all, I don't agree in the abduction phenomenon. I also don't agree that we need to see these quote-unquote visitors as physical ETs. I'm of the Jacques Vallée genre. I think they're a little bit more complicated than that. Also, in the abduction phenomenon, I think that that's been a misnomer laid out by the false, quote-unquote, research of Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs. That's established the genre of the abduction phenomenon. That's a very lengthy discussion. We can have a separate discussion on that on another day. Very lengthy. But what almost all of the individuals involved in the organization, we believe, is that the UFO phenomenon is part of this integrated phenomenon involving consciousness. What you have with all these experiences, including the UFO phenomenon, is you have a manipulation of space-time. Okay? So if these are physical beings coming from a physical planet, Mars, Venus, or some unknown planet, as Jacques Vallée said a very, very long time, these experiences involve a manipulation of space-time. Same thing with near-death experiences, with out-of-body experiences, astral travel, and theogenic journeys. Your Aunt Sally visits you 2 days after she dies. Again, these are manipulations of space-time. So you might be seeing Aunt Sally, but Aunt Sally does not reside and live in this physical 3D dimension, just like these beings that people are commonly calling them ETs. Okay. Secondly, all of these experiences involve human consciousness traveling to other multidimensional realities. I would argue the vast majority of these so-called abduction experiences is human consciousness traveling to another reality. Okay, when I would say the vast majority of people that have not been primed via hypnotic regressions, first of all, they remember very little of the actual traveling to another location. That's number one. And I guess that's pretty much universally understood. It's only under someone asking these questions on the hypnotic regressions that all of a sudden, this information starts to come out. Oh, I was on a spaceship. Oh, I did this, I did that, whatever. But again, a lot of these individuals have been primed over many, many, many years of reading Whitley Strieber, of reading Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, etc. Okay? Now, for example, Kathleen Martin, Mary Rodwell, and Barbara Lamb state that over the last 10 years, they haven't met anyone that's had an abduction experiences. Okay? Yes. Ask Kathleen Martin, okay? And they might have here occasionally, one or two people. But that's pretty much universal among the people that have been researching this phenomenon. And you can ask yourself, a lot of questions. Why? Okay? One reason why is because people are now beginning to talk universally about the topic of consciousness, that this phenomenon is not necessarily a physicalist phenomenon, but a consciousness-based phenomenon. So a lot of people get influenced by what they read and what they listen to. And I think, like Whitley Strieber, for example, Kathleen Martin is another example. She started off writing the book Captured, okay, about, an abduction phenomenon. Now she just wrote a book about titled From Abductions to Spirituality. She's all love and light, okay? Whitley Strieber talked about communion and anal probes, okay? Now he prays to these beings that gave him spirituality, okay, and allowed him to talk to his deceased wife. And his last three books have all been about that topic, love and light, okay? What we determined was that close to over 90% of these individuals that had an abduction experience all of a sudden turned into love and light people. Okay? Well, these are thousands of people.
I'm going to jump in here for a minute.
Yeah.
And with all due respect to Aunt Sally, everybody on the research committee has investigated cases or run into cases where there are what we would call crossover phenomena. Things like you had a UFO experience or a contact, and then a week later you have poltergeist stuff going on in your house.
Yes, Kathleen Martin sent, as a matter of fact, we were in communication with Brent Raines, and you know who Brent Raines is, okay?
He's friends
of the show, friends of both of us. And in that, what had happened was that Brent had sent Kathleen a document which was written in the late 60s by one of the main librarians at the Library of Congress. And it was all about UFOs. And which is a literature review of all the books that have been written about UFOs. And part of her introduction was that this is so much like a paranormal phenomenon. You're having all types of paranormal experiences. And so Kathleen Martin thanked Brent for that and said, almost all of my UFO abduction experiences cases involves paranormal experiences afterwards. Like in my case, I called down a huge UAP, and then it was 4 years of nonstop paranormal experiences. So yes, I agree with that both of these phenomena should be linked. But as you know, the field of ufology only recently has come to appreciate that component of the phenomenon.
That's true. It's very interesting that a friend of mine sent me just the other day a clip from former CIA Director John Brennan, which I had never seen before. And he's actually talking, and he seems kind of embarrassed about it. He's looking down at the floor about alternate new forms of life and hinting around about the existence of a multiverse, metaverse, interdimensionality, all the things we've been talking about. And I've always suspected that the government knows all about this, and that's the big secret. You know, if we all grew up with, Mr. Spock and Planet of the Apes, and I think we'd be perfectly fine with somebody visiting from some other planet. But if they're right next to you all the time, all possibilities, all good, all bad, that would scare the daylights out of people, and rightly so. I think that's the big secret.
I agree with you. The big news is not UFO disclosure. The big news is that there exists alternate realities, higher dimensions of reality, whatever you might want to call it. And let me just give you a very, very clear illustration of this, Paul. We have, throughout the history of Free and now CCRI, we've had many Ph.D. Physicists involved with our organizations. Not all of them, but I would say the majority were some type of experiencers. And I'll tell you what Rudy Shields told me, and this is exactly what these other Ph.D. physicists told me. They said, Ray, if you get a Ph.D. today in theoretical physics, you will become an adherent to a multiverse theory. Okay?
Yep.
So that means if you get a Ph.D. in theoretical physics today at any of the major universities in the world, you're going to come out knowing, not believing, but knowing that there are multiple dimensions,
Yeah. Rudy Shields being a Harvard cosmologist.
Correct. Emeritus professor of astrophysics at Harvard University.
Right.
And so Michio Kaku is the most famous string theorist, but half of MIT are string theorists, the theoretical physicists. And they hold that there are either 11 or 12 dimensions. Okay, so this is right next door to you, in Boston,
Sure.
saying that, our reality is a multidimensional reality. And so definitely the government knows about this because they contract out with these scientists for numerous types of papers and documents and experiments.
I know some. So do you.
Yeah, so, they get billions of dollars all around the United States in research funds, these physics departments. So they know this phenomena, but the average Joe Schmo out in the street doesn't know this,
Think about it, Ray. You can control the internet, right? You can't control consciousness. I mean, the government can't do that. Nobody, I believe, could. But if you don't acknowledge a consciousness and you have what is today the modern internet, which is all electronics and physical, it's controlled what you see, what you don't see, what you understand, and so forth, and you're in constant contact, you have no time for consciousness. So you don't develop that. But if everyone focused on developing their consciousness, how do you block the consciousness highway once someone's tapped into it? You can't. It's not.
Yeah, it's the whole realm of this new mindset of thought, of consciousness. It's think of it as someone that's already had a near-death experience. These people are totally transformed, okay? They no longer believe that being wealthy is important. They become deeply spiritual. They don't fear death. They become much more ecologically friendly, that we need to protect our planet. They become much more loving and caring, okay? And these are not components of a greedy capitalist, society, and there's very little control mechanism, because the reality is not external. The reality is internal, okay, that we are eternal spiritual beings, and that you're actually preparing yourself for the afterlife by being a good person in this physical life. And so it's a different mindset. And certainly not controllable. So yes, I would agree with that concept.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that has always come up in my research, and mainly because I was burned by it very early on in the 70s, was the notion of what are we talking to, and are they what they appear to be in these contact modalities, if I may use the term, and do they really have our best interests at heart? Now, from the results of many of these contacts, as you say, Ray, the great spirituality is awakened. Many good things have come of it. Other things lead to dead ends. So how, in your opinion, should all of us differentiate and avoid the tricksters, if you will?
Okay, I think the tricksters, from my perspective, are the individuals that are spreading misinformation and disinformation. I think the tricksters are you going to a website or these UFO conferences and listen to these lecturers. These people are totally clueless about the phenomenon, talking about, Rendlesham Forest and Roswell for the 5,000th time, or this new Tic Tac video and things of that sort. I think those are the tricksters. There is an element in this, as you know, of negativity to some of this phenomenon. And we could discuss that in a second. But first of all, I just want to say that our research study was 4,300 people from over 125 countries that had UFO contact experiences. And what we discovered was that initially 37% of these individuals viewed their experiences as negative, as frightening primarily in the beginning. But yet the majority of these people had continued experiences. And then over time, just like Whitley Strieber and Kathleen Martin, their experiences became much more positive, much more spiritual, much more benevolent. So by the end, when they took the survey, only 4% perceived their experiences as negative, okay? And on top of that, these experiences were highly transformative for the positive. As I alluded to before, people didn't care about money. They became much more spiritual, much more ecological, much more loving. They didn't fear death, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We asked over 70 questions, and we duplicated the research findings of Dr. Kenneth Ring that concluded that the NDE phenomenon is a reciprocal of the abduction phenomenon, because he asked these same questions to 85 NDE experiencers and 85 abductees. And what did he find out? That these people changed in exactly the same way. So we asked those questions, and what did we find out? The same exact conclusion that Dr. Kenneth Ring did in 1996, except we did our research study between 2013 and 2017. So same exact findings. But however, there is this component of what you have mentioned in some of your books, of these attachments, these spiritual attachments, whatever you might want to call it. And again, you can only speculate about what this is, but we have in our book 3 particular experiencers that have had this phenomenon. One is a retired school teacher. One is this man that owned an insurance company, a very well-off businessman. And then this other person I forgot exactly what her occupation was, but these are all college graduates. And they talked about this phenomenon of attachments, and it was negative. And so, yes, that
the guys
yes.
or parasites. I mean, excuse me.
Yeah. Parasites is the term that Paul had used, and so that phenomenon is very real. The experiencers have spoken about it, but I don't want the audience members out there to think that these are as common as the other phenomenon that we're talking about. What we discovered, it was a very tiny % of the individuals that had these experiences, but they appeared to be very real from the people that I've spoken with and from the details of their.
So, Ray,
yeah,
where does that fit in? And what I mean by that is, if you have these negative experiences, you have these parasites. Paul's done research in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and a host of others, but. I mean, so those experiences we have documented, and I understand you've documented them too. My question, in this world of light and love, where does the parasite fit in? Is it an evil piece to this? Is it the dark side? What's the interpretation?
Well, I'll tell you what my personal interpretation is, and again, it's just speculation, okay? Because there really aren't, thousands of cases for you to, do in-depth interviews, structured surveys, and delve into these things. But my personal perspective is that the human consciousness, when it dies, normally it goes up and to the supreme mind of God and integrates with source. Okay, many people that do astral traveling. Tons of people that do astral traveling talk about that before you get to the higher source, there are human consciousness that did not make that journey, okay, that are still stuck in these astral planes. And many of these human consciousness might be so attached to our physical reality that they might bleed into our reality and might have influence over our thoughts, our consciousness, our way of thinking. And just like we see Aunt Sally, and Aunt Sally might telepathically communicate with their nephew, and other types of intelligence, other hierarchies from other realms, like perceived angels and other types of beings travel down from other astral realms into our 3D reality. I think that whatever this intelligence is, and my hypothesis is that these are individuals that did not make the full journey to go back. Okay, now that's just my hypothesis.
Are they upset in coming back and like terrorizing the victims of it? Like, and you may not. Of course, it's a broad open question, but like my idea of the parasite is. It's negative energy. It's feeding off of something, or it wants to eat something negative, if I can put it in those terms. And when you mentioned someone not making the full journey, why would that be? Could that possibly be they were quote unquote bad people or not ready, and they've come back to terrorize? Or
well, I think those people that did not make the full journey, these are people that still had some type of attachment to the physical reality. Now, the parasites is another component, I think. Okay, there's some people that are just, from the day they're born, they're out to do nothing that with love. These are just bad souls. And then these people, for whatever reason, these human consciousness, I should say, for whatever reason, have managed to bleed back and interact with our reality. And so I again, this is separate from the people that have died that didn't make the full journey, like right. a child, for example, that might have been raped and then killed herself. Right. She's not going to be one of these parasites, but she's hanging in this limbo type of environment, because a lot of people that do astral traveling, they've talked about trying to get these human consciousness, souls, whatever you might want to call it, and bring them back to source. Like saying, look, go through the light. Here's where you're going. These are the major experiencers of astral traveling. And there aren't that many in the world, but there are quite a few. And I've spoken to many of them, and they talk about that particular phenomenon. But again, anyone's guess is a great guess because we know very little about this phenomenon. There are some, Paul has done some case studies on this, but I'm sure he can tell you, he hasn't done thousands of these case studies and been able to administer questions to these people, statistical studies and in-depth interviews and fill up, several books on this topic. It's ripe for exploration,
Okay, I think we have time for one more brief question, and we're kind of backing up a little bit. Ray, how would you define a UFO contact experience? When we stood in Pennsylvania, a bunch of us, and got on video this, I'm sure you've seen that this really strange thing in the sky for about 3 minutes. Was that a UFO contact experience, or do you have to have actual contact with whoever or whatever is controlling these things?
Well, a lot of people don't realize is that there's thousands of people all around the world that are going outside their house. They're either praying, they're meditating, or just calling, a loving calling down to see UFO intelligence, and usually within a short period of time they appear, okay? And my dear friend Dr. Joseph Burks calls it human-initiated contact experiences. And other people prefer the term CE5, and I don't like that term. That's a marketing term used by this marketer outside there to pocket millions of dollars on the phenomenon. And so I prefer the term HICE, human-initiated contact experiences. And what I believe they are, I believe they're holographic projections. And maybe after the break, I could go back in detail why I think that. And that's also the opinion of Dr. Joseph Burks. He wrote a paper for our new book saying that we live inside a virtual reality and that the UFO phenomenon is part of that phenomenon and that what we're seeing are actually holograms. And I agree with that.
Okay. We're just about out of time, but Ray, tell us when the book is coming out, how people can get it.
The book will be coming out August 1st. Send me an email, and I will send you free chapters from our first book, Beyond UFOs, at least half of it. I'll send you over 350 pages. And then from our new book, I'll be sending you 6 chapters from our new book. The name of the book is A Greater Reality. My email is info, I-N-F-O, at agreaterreality.com. So that's info at agreaterreality.com. We also have a website, which is still under construction, but you could take a look at it, as the names of the titles of the authors and the articles that are going to be in our book. And our website is agreaterreality.com.
Okay, very good. Well, Rick, why don't you take us away with our announcements?
Of course. If you're into Alien Crunch ice cream or Oswald burgers and spaceship chips, you're in luck. The Exeter UFO Festival returns in September at the historic Exeter, New Hampshire Town Hall over the weekend. That's September 3rd and 4th. This is a great event, and the whole downtown gets involved. It's sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to benefit local children's charities. Along with ourselves, speaker, that would be Ben, not me, we'll include Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, Mike Stevens, Lynn Nickerson, Valerie LaFaso, Mike Maloney, and 2 new faces, Sean and Joss. I'm going to try to say La Genesee.
La Jeunesse, and actually I just got word that they aren't going to be able to be there, so that's my fault on the script. All right.
No worries. The subject of Paul and Ben's talk will be time storms, with the thanks to the great British researcher Jenny Randalls, who coined the term. They plan to do their traditional live broadcast from the event on Sunday with a panel of the speakers. This is a very fun event, so join them if you can. Visit ExeterUFOFestival.org for more details.
And visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and right here on WOON AM and FM, including shows that have been restored in the archives there. Also hear many of these broadcasts on major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can also download our show app. It's free. It doesn't do a lot, but it'll give you all these links to the shows as we put them up after they're recorded. And you can also find out more on the website about our cases over the years, about ourselves, how to book us, and things of that kind. So, Rick, talk about our charities.
Sure, and I will say that app is very, very easy to use. So please download it. The website has a charity page with links to several good causes they've adopted, including Hope for Hillsdale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and most recently, the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund.
So what do we have around the corner for next week?
Next week, June 26th, Ben will be back. And the guest will be UFO researcher and author Preston Dennett on the abduction of Dolly, an amazing case from Florida. And Dolly herself may even be here. And
that'll really carry on from the discussion we had today about these utopian worlds, contact modalities, the spiritualization of the whole thing, and it's really will fit right in with our discussion today. So we'll leave you today with a dynamic thought from our good friend and occasional co-host, astronomer Mark D'Antonio, and I spoiled it early on by using the quote, "Today's paranormal is tomorrow's science." Well worth saying again. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Rick Eno, sitting in for Ben. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we'll see you this time next week on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.